He thought it was just another traffic stop. But that night, under flashing blue lights, Ethan's life collided with James's past, unlocking secrets, betrayal, and a fight for the right to love openly. A story where silence hurts more than words, and truth can cost everything. It was close to midnight when I finally left the office building in downtown Boston. The city at that hour felt like two different worlds colliding. The glass towers glowing with the last remnants of corporate light, and the empty streets where the sound of a single car seemed louder than life itself. I had worked late, as usual, coding through problems that no one else on my team had managed to solve. Being a programmer, especially a freelancer who took pride in never missing a deadline, meant nights like these weren't rare for me. But something about that Friday night felt different from the start. The air was unusually still, heavy with the faint scent of the harbor. The skyline was sharp, the cold, late autumn wind brushing across my face as I walked toward my car. My old Honda Civic sat under a broken streetlight, a familiar shadow waiting to carry me back to my apartment in Cambridge. My head buzzed with fatigue, but my thoughts were strangely clear until the sudden flash of blue lights appeared in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was nothing. A police cruiser passing through, heading somewhere else, maybe chasing another driver. But the lights didn't pass. They locked on me, reflecting against the side mirrors and splashing across the dark asphalt. My stomach tightened instantly, my heart racing even though I was certain I hadn't broken a single rule. No speeding, no broken lights, no reason. Still, I eased off the gas, pulled carefully to the side of the road, and parked beneath another flickering street lamp. The moment the engine went silent, everything around me seemed too loud. The wind pushing through empty branches, the faint hum of the city miles away, and the approaching footsteps that echoed heavier than they should have. I lowered the window halfway, my fingers trembling slightly, though I told myself there was no reason to be nervous. Then I saw him. The officer who stepped out of the patrol car was taller than I expected, the kind of tall that made you instinctively straighten your back. His figure was sharp against the glow of his headlights, the uniform cutting a distinct outline as he walked slowly, deliberately toward me. There was nothing rushed about his pace. Every step seemed measured, almost rehearsed, as if he already knew how this moment would unfold. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm but deep, carrying an authority that immediately pressed against my chest. "License and registration, please." I nodded quickly, reaching for my wallet in the glove compartment, careful with each movement, overly conscious of how my hands looked. I passed him the documents through the window. For a brief second, his gloved fingers brushed against mine. The contact was minimal, fleeting, yet it sent a spark through me that I couldn't explain. Not fear, not exactly. Something more complicated, something heavier. He glanced down at my license. "Ethan Miller," he read aloud, letting the syllables hang in the cold night air longer than necessary. There was a strange weight in the way he spoke my name, as if he was testing how it sounded on his tongue. His eyes flicked from the plastic card back to me. "Where are you coming from at this hour, Mr. Miller?" he asked. I cleared my throat, forcing a casual tone that didn't quite reach my own ears. "Work. I'm a programmer. Deadlines don't care about the clock." His expression didn't change, but something about his eyes, a shade too sharp, too attentive, unsettled me. Most officers, after hearing such an answer, would simply nod, maybe lecture about being careful on the road, and let me go. But he didn't. He just stood there, holding my license, staring at me as though I had said something that triggered a memory he couldn't shake. The silence stretched. The blue lights behind him kept flashing, turning his face into a shifting mask of shadow and brightness. "You remind me of someone," he said finally, his voice quieter now, more personal than official. The words landed with the weight of something I hadn't expected. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. That was not the kind of statement you anticipate hearing during a traffic stop. It wasn't protocol, it wasn't professional, it was something else entirely. I tried to break the tension with a nervous chuckle. "I hope that's a good thing." He didn't laugh. His eyes stayed locked on mine. "Depends on how you define good." The way he said it made my chest tighten, not out of fear, but out of unease, The kind of unease you feel when you realize someone is seeing more of you than you intended to show. My pulse quickened. My instincts told me to stay polite, to keep this simple, to get my license back and drive away. But something in his posture, in his voice, suggested that wasn't what he wanted. He stepped a little closer to the car window, enough that I could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the subtle way his jaw tightened, as if he was holding back words. He leaned slightly, lowering his voice. You ever get the feeling that life gives you second chances? Unexpected ones. My mouth went dry. Not really, officer, I managed. I usually just meet deadlines. The corner of his mouth twitched, not a smile, not quite. You sound like him, he whispered, almost to himself. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. The night felt heavier, the air colder. Something personal was happening here, but I was caught in it without understanding why. My car, my safe space, suddenly felt like a cage. Finally, he handed my license back, but slowly, as if reluctant to let it go. His eyes never left mine. Drive safe, Ethan, he said, my name once again stretched out like an echo. I nodded quickly, started the engine, but my hands shook against the wheel. The encounter had been too long, too loaded with something I couldn't name. This wasn't just a routine stop. I felt in my bones. As I pulled away, the blue lights faded behind me, but the officer's words stayed burned into my thoughts. You remind me of someone. Who? Why me? And why did it feel like the story wasn't over yet? When I drove away that first night, the flashing blue lights still dancing in my rearview mirror, I thought the encounter was over. A strange, unsettling stop, sure, but just another memory I would eventually file away alongside the countless moments that make up a city night. I was wrong, because the way he had said my name, the way his eyes had lingered with something raw and unfinished, refused to let go of me. It echoed inside my head like the hum of electricity in an empty room. I didn't expect to see him again so soon. And yet, just days later, fate, or something stranger, decided otherwise. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when I saw him again. I was leaving a late meeting in Cambridge, walking toward the same battered Civic parked near the edge of a dimly lit street. The kind of street where the shadows felt thicker than usual, where the air itself seemed to hold its breath. And there he was, James, not in his cruiser this time, not with lights flashing, but standing near my car as though he had been waiting. For a split second, I froze, unsure if I should walk closer or turn away. But before I could decide, he spoke. You really do look like him, he said, his voice softer than I remembered. It wasn't the commanding tone of an officer on duty. It was unsteady, almost fragile, the kind of voice you'd expect from someone who had carried a secret too long. I stepped closer, wary but drawn in. Like who? His eyes flickered in the glow of the street lamp, and for the first time, I saw something behind them that unsettled me more than authority ever could. Regret. Deep, carved in regret. He hesitated before answering, as though every word cost him. Someone I loved, he said finally, and someone I lost because I didn't have the courage to hold on. The words stunned me, not because they revealed anything concrete, but because of the weight behind them. His voice cracked, slightly unloved, as if the syllable itself had cut him open. He wasn't telling me a fact. He was confessing a wound. I didn't know what to say. My instinct was to retreat, to let this man wrestle with his ghosts on his own. But something about the rawness in his tone rooted me to the spot. He looked down for a moment, his jaw tightening, then back at me. Do you know what it's like to betray yourself so completely that you can never look in a mirror the same way again? I swallowed hard. His words weren't directed at me exactly, but they pierced me anyway. Maybe because I did know something about hiding parts of myself, about shaping who I was into something others found easier to accept. James exhaled sharply, his breath visible in the cool air. He was everything, he continued, more to himself than to me. And I let him slip away. No, worse than that. I pushed him away. I broke his trust because I was too much of a coward to admit what he meant to me. I thought I could bury him under rules and uniforms and silence. But the past doesn't stay buried, Ethan. It claws its way back up when you least expect it. The way he said my name again made me stiffen. It wasn't just that he was projecting his lost lover onto me. It was that part of him wanted to. He was staring at me, as if trying to force two faces into one memory, testing whether the present could replace what he had destroyed. I wanted to protest, to tell him I wasn't whoever he remembered, but the words stuck in my throat. There was something magnetic about the honesty spilling from him, the way his controlled exterior was cracking open. His gaze locked on mine, steady but full of storm. When I saw you that night, I thought I was hallucinating. Same look in the eyes. Same way of tilting your head when you're thinking. For a second, I thought I'd been given another chance. But I don't deserve one, not after what I did. Silence stretched between us, thick as smoke. I finally found my voice. What exactly did you do? His lips pressed together, as though he hated the taste of the truth he was about to reveal. His shoulders slumped slightly, and in that moment he no longer looked like the towering officer from the roadside. He looked like a man carrying the ruins of his own decisions. I lied, he said. I lied to him. I lied to myself. I pretended I didn't feel what I felt because I was afraid of what people would say, of what the job would do to me, of what it meant to choose him openly. I turned my back on him the night he needed me most. And when I tried to go back, it was too late. He was gone. The raw honesty in his tone left me shaken. His confession wasn't wrapped in excuses, wasn't dressed up to sound noble. It was bare, ugly, and human. You can't rewrite the past, I said quietly, though my voice betrayed my unease. His eyes didn't waver. No, but sometimes the past finds a way of rewriting you, and you don't get to choose when it comes knocking. The street around us seemed emptier, the night heavier. Every flicker of the street lamp felt like punctuation to the silence that followed. I realized my breath had quickened, though I wasn't sure if it was from fear or something else entirely. He took a small step closer, his voice dropping lower. You don't know how much you resemble him, Ethan. It's haunting. The same sharpness in the eyes, the same stubbornness in the way you hold yourself. I've spent years pretending that chapter of my life was dead. And then you show up in the middle of the night like some cruel reminder. Or maybe a test. His words lingered, dangerous in their intimacy. I didn't answer right away. My instincts told me to back away, to end this, to get in my car and leave. But there was something in his confession that hooked me. Maybe it was because, deep down, I knew the language of regret too well. I knew what it was like to feel out of place in my own skin, to silence myself before anyone else had the chance to. He searched my face, as though waiting for me to say something that would absolve him or condemn him. When I stayed silent, he gave a bitter laugh, the sound harsh in the still night. You don't have to say anything, he muttered. I know how insane this must sound. A cop unloading his failures on a stranger, he pulled over. But believe me, Ethan, I don't do this. I don't ever do this. You're the exception. Just by existing, you've cracked something open in me that I thought was sealed shut forever. The confession hung between us like a live wire. I didn't know whether to recoil or lean closer. All I knew was that his presence, his words, had changed something I couldn't name yet. And as I drove away later, leaving James standing under that broken street lamp, one thought gnawed at me. If the past had such a hold on him, what would it do to me now that I'd been pulled into its shadow? I had always thought of myself as someone used to silence. Silence from family dinners where my words were brushed aside as unnecessary. Silence from relatives who never asked the questions they didn't want the answers to. Silence that filled the spaces where understanding should have been. I learned early that being myself carried a cost, and that cost was measured in distance. Distance from people I should have trusted most. Distance from belonging. But that night with James, under the fragile glow of a half-broken street lamp, the city hushed around us. I felt something I hadn't felt before. Recognition, not in the sense of familiarity, but in the way he looked at me, as if he had seen past every layer I had carefully put on to protect myself. It was terrifying. It was also strangely comforting. His words about betrayal and cowardice still rang in my ears. But beyond the pain in his confession, there was something that struck a chord inside me. He spoke the language of fear I knew too well. Fear of being seen. Fear of being named. Fear of standing in a room and having every pair of eyes measure you against an invisible standard you never asked for. I found myself speaking before I even realized it. You don't know me, but you're not wrong. James tilted his head slightly, his gaze never softening, but shifting. Not the sharp assessment of a police officer, but the measured attention of someone who had just discovered a secret door in a house he thought was locked. Not wrong about what? I hesitated, but the silence between us demanded honesty. About hiding, about being afraid, about choosing the version of yourself people accept, instead of the one that keeps you awake at night. His eyes didn't leave mine. In the thin light, they seemed darker, pulling me in. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting for someone to say the very thing I had just admitted. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The night was quiet except for the occasional hum of a distant car. Then James's voice, low and steady, cut through. You think you're the only one who carries that weight? You think you invented silence? I almost smiled, but the weight of his words held me still. No, I said softly, but sometimes it feels like it. That was when his posture shifted. The authority, the rigid stance of a man trained to control every moment, faltered. He leaned closer, lowering his voice in a way that made me feel the world had narrowed to just the two of us. I didn't stop you that night by chance, he said. The words landed like a stone in water, rippling through me in every direction. My breath caught, my grip tightening on the car door at my side. What do you mean? I asked cautiously. He didn't look away, didn't flinch. I'd seen you before, weeks earlier, outside a coffee shop near the harbor. You were standing with a paper cup in one hand, your phone in the other, oblivious to the world. I remember thinking I had seen that posture before, that tilt of the head. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but it wasn't. It was you, and from that moment, I couldn't stop noticing. My chest tightened. The way he spoke, every syllable deliberate, pulled me further into the weight of his confession. So you followed me? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. I noticed you, he corrected, though the pause in his voice betrayed more than his words admitted. I didn't approach you then, but when I saw your car on the highway, I took the opportunity. The street seemed to grow smaller, the night pressing in. My instincts screamed at me to retreat, to shut the car door, to drive away and leave him with his regrets. But another part of me, the part starved for recognition, for someone who understood the fracture lines I lived with every day, wouldn't let me move. He ran a hand slowly down his face, as if wiping away the last fragment of composure he had. You need to understand. I'm not proud of it. I don't know what I expected. But when I saw you, something broke in me. I thought maybe fate was giving me a chance to face what I ran from, to say out loud the things I buried. I swallowed hard. His words should have unsettled me more than they did. And yet, beneath the unease, there was a flicker of something else, something I didn't want to name. Because in his broken honesty, I saw pieces of myself reflected back. Do you know what it's like, he continued, to see someone who feels like both a stranger and a reminder of everything you lost? To feel your past and present collide in a single glance. Yes, I whispered before I could stop myself. The word escaped, raw and unfiltered, because I did know. Different circumstances, different story, but I knew. His eyes softened just slightly, though his voice stayed rough. That's why I stopped you, Ethan. Not because of the law, because I couldn't walk away again. I needed to know if I was losing my mind, or if the universe was punishing me with the most painful kind of déjà vu. I should have been angry. I should have called out the impropriety of it all, the invasion of boundaries. But anger didn't come. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. The calm that comes when someone finally speaks aloud what you've always known but never admitted. I met his gaze steadily, though my heart pounded against my ribs. And now that you know, the silence stretched again, thicker this time, almost unbearable. James's jaw tightened, his lips parting as though the answer weighed more than he could carry. That's the problem, he said, voice low, heavy with conflict. I don't know. And in that moment, standing there between the pull of the past and the uncertainty of the present, I realized just how thin the line was between fear and courage, between stranger and confidant, between the truth we bury and the truth that refuses to stay silent. If secrets have a life of their own, then ours was never meant to remain hidden. What began as fragments of conversation, exchanged under dim street lamps and in stolen moments, soon spilled beyond the walls we thought protected us. It started with whispers. I noticed them first in the way neighbors paused mid-sentence when I walked by, their eyes flicking toward me, then away, as though my presence had rearranged the air. At work, I felt the same sensation. Conversations ending too abruptly, glances shared across desks that weren't meant to reach me. Rumors are invisible at first, but you feel their weight long before you hear their words. My family, predictably, was less subtle. I don't even know how the story reached them. Perhaps through the grapevine of relatives who always seemed to know more about my life than I willingly shared. My mother's voice on the phone was brittle cold. "We heard things about you," she said, the phrase sharpened by disappointment. She didn't need to elaborate. I knew what she meant. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself that their disapproval was nothing new. I had been disappointing expectations since I was old enough to choose differently from what was planned for me. But this was different. This wasn't about career choices or my refusal to fit their definition of success. This was about who I was, who I cared for. And their silence, heavier than their words, told me they had already made their judgment. James's world was no kinder. Within the police department, rumors spread with the speed and cruelty of wildfire. I saw it in the way his colleagues greeted him with clipped professionalism, in the stares that lasted half a second too long, in the muttered jokes that carried just enough venom to sting without ever being direct. The uniform that once shielded him now became a stage where every gesture was scrutinized. When we met again after those weeks of silence, his face told the story before his words did. He looked tired, shoulders hunched, as though carrying the weight of an invisible trial. "They know," he said simply. His voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual authority. I didn't ask who they were. It didn't matter. I already knew. He rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes refusing to meet mine. "It's getting harder every day." Whispers at the station. Questions I can't answer. Looks I can't ignore. I built a life on control, Ethan. Control of myself, control of how people see me. And now it's slipping. I waited, holding my breath, because I already sensed where his words were heading. "I can't do this," he said finally. The words dropped like stones into the silence between us. I felt them sink, heavy and merciless, dragging down everything we had shared, every fragile thread of connection we had dared to spin. "You can't do what?" I asked, though I already knew. "This," he gestured vaguely, helplessly, toward me, toward us, toward the invisible line that connected us. I thought I could face it. I thought maybe I could stand against the noise. But I can't. Not now. Not with everything at stake. His fear was naked, and yet it struck me like betrayal. Because it wasn't just about what he was giving up, it was about what he was asking me to surrender with him. "So that's it." My voice was sharper than I intended. "You retreat, and I'm supposed to just accept it?" He winced, as though my words cut deeper than he expected. "It's not that simple." But to me it was. It had to be. For years, I had lived with silence, with rejection, with being told that parts of me were too inconvenient to acknowledge. And now, when I thought I had found someone who understood, someone who could stand beside me in the storm, he was walking away. I could see the battle in his eyes, the war between what he wanted and what he feared. But in the end, fear always speaks louder. "I'm sorry," he whispered. And that was the breaking point. Not because he left, but because in leaving, he confirmed the lesson I had tried so hard to unlearn. That people will choose comfort over truth, even when truth is the only thing worth holding on to. As he turned away, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet resolve, sharp and merciless. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me, about refusing to let someone else's fear dictate the worth of my own life. That night, I understood. The line between connection and betrayal is as thin as a breath. And when it breaks, you don't return to who you were before. You become someone else entirely. Someone who has seen what it means to be abandoned at the edge of trust, and who will never forget the cost. A year is a long time when you measure it in silence. Long enough for wounds to scab, for anger to dull into something colder, for the sharp ache of betrayal to settle into the background of daily life. But even after 12 months, James's absence had not vanished from my thoughts. It clung like smoke, faint but impossible to scrub away completely. The months after he left were brutal. I told myself I didn't care, that I had expected it all along, that fear always wins in the end. And yet, every night, when the city quieted and my own defenses slipped, I replayed his words. I can't do this. Not because he didn't want to, but because he was too afraid. That was what burned deepest. So I rebuilt myself. I focused on my work, poured my hours into projects, allowed the glow of screens and the hum of code to drown out the noise of doubt. I taught myself to stop waiting for a text that would never come, a knock at the door that never arrived. I told myself his story was over. And then, a year later, he was there again. It happened on a rainy evening in Boston. I had ducked into a small bookstore near the harbor to escape the storm, the kind of place where the smell of old paper and damp coats lingered in the air. I was standing in one of the narrow aisles, running my fingers absent-mindedly along spines, when I heard a voice behind me. Ethan. Just my name. Nothing more. But the sound of it, spoken in a voice I knew too well, froze me to the spot. Slowly I turned. James stood there, without a uniform, without the shield of authority. He looked older, somehow, not in years, but in weight carried and shed. His posture was different, less rigid, as though he had put down a burden he'd carried too long. And his eyes, those eyes that once flickered with conflict, now burned with something steadier. I didn't speak. I waited. He stepped closer, water dripping from his coat onto the worn wooden floor. I left, he said, the words spilling quickly, as if they had been rehearsed 1,000 times. I left the department. I couldn't live inside that cage any longer. Not if it meant losing myself again. Not if it meant losing you. I should have been angry. I should have demanded why it took him a year to come to this realization. But instead, what I felt was a deep, dangerous pull, the kind of gravity that draws you back to something you swore you'd outgrown. Why now? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Because I finally understood that fear isn't a life, he answered. His eyes locked onto mine. I've lived in fear for too long. Of judgment. Of whispers. Of losing a job that was already killing me piece by piece. I don't want to waste another second living for other people's approval. His honesty cut through me. This wasn't the James who had turned away, who had chosen silence over truth. This was someone who had been remade by his own regret. And what makes you think, I said slowly, that after everything, I'd let you walk back in my life? His jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. Nothing. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect ease. All I can give you is the truth. No more hiding. No more lies. I want to stand beside you, even if the world spits in our faces. I'd rather take their hate with you than live another year pretending without you. The bookstore around us seemed to dissolve, the storm outside fading to a dull roar. All that remained was his voice, raw and unguarded. For a long moment, I said nothing. My heart pounded, caught between anger and longing, between the memory of abandonment and the reality of this confession. Finally, I whispered, "You broke me once." His expression twisted with pain. "I know, and I'll carry that until the day I die. But if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I've changed." The weight of his words pressed against me, but beneath the heaviness was something else, the flicker of possibility. Because the truth was, even after a year, even after the silence and betrayal, part of me had never stopped wanting to hear those words. We left the bookstore together that night, stepping out into the rain. The whispers, the judgment, the sideways glances, they didn't vanish. They never would. But this time, they didn't break us. Because for the first time, we weren't hiding. And as we walked side by side through the wet streets of Boston, I realized the fragile line we had once walked between fear and courage, betrayal and trust, had been crossed. This was no longer a story about what we had lost. It was a story about what we had chosen.